Kunle woke up the next morning with a sense of clarity but also lingering confusion. The weight of Madam Abeni's tests had left him both exhausted and curious. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her challenges than met the eye. What was her true intention? Why was she pushing him so hard? As he made his way to Madam Abeni's mansion, the morning sun cast a golden glow over the village. Kunle found himself replaying the events of the last few days, trying to make sense of it all. By the time he arrived, Mama Ekaiti was waiting for him at the door, her expression more serious than usual. "Kunle," she said, her voice low, "Madam Abeni has something important to discuss with you today. Be prepared." Kunle nodded, his heart pounding as he stepped into the grand sitting room. Madam Abeni was seated by the window, her usual regal presence softened by a pensive look. She gestured for him to sit. "Kunle," she began, her voice calm but firm, "you've come far, and you've shown qualities I rarely see in people. But before we continue, I need to share something with you." Kunle leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Years ago," Madame Abeni continued, "I was much like you. Ambitious, determined, and eager to escape poverty. I was willing to do whatever it took to rise above my circumstances. But in my pursuit of wealth, I made mistakes that cost me dearly." Kunle leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Years ago," Madame Abeni continued, "I was much like you, ambitious, determined, and eager to escape poverty. I was willing to do whatever it took to rise above my circumstances. But in my pursuit of wealth, I made mistakes that cost me dearly." Her voice faltered for a moment, and Kunle noticed a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "I lost people I cared about," she admitted. "I became someone I didn't recognize. And now I see that same fire in you, the same hunger. I've been testing you because I wanted to see if you could succeed without losing yourself like I did." Kunle was stunned. He hadn't expected such a personal revelation from Madam Abeni. Her words made him question his own journey and what he was truly chasing. Madam Abeni straightened in her chair, her tone sharpening. "Today, I have another task for you. But this one is different. It's not about money or loyalty. It's about trust." Kunle's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, madam?" She handed him a sealed envelope. "There's a woman in the neighboring village, Auntie Nkim. She's a close friend of mine, and I need you to deliver this to her. But understand this. She's someone who values honesty above all else. Your words and actions will matter more than you think." Kunle accepted the envelope, sensing the gravity of the task. He didn't ask any further questions, knowing that Madam Abeni would reveal more only if she wanted to. The journey to the neighboring village was long, but Kunle's mind was busy with thoughts. Who was Auntie Nkem, and why was this task so important? The landscape changed as he approached the village. Fields of crops stretched out under the sun, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh earth and flowers. When he arrived at Auntie Nkem's modest home, he was greeted by a warm but stern-looking woman in her late 50s. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes sparkled with intelligence and curiosity. "You must be Kunle," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Madam Abeni told me you'd be coming." Kunle nodded and handed her the envelope. As she opened it and read its contents, her expression changed. First surprise, then a mix of emotions Kunle couldn't quite read. "You've been tested, haven't you?" she asked, folding the letter carefully. "Yes, ma'am," Kunle replied. "I've been doing my best to prove myself to Madam Abeni." Auntie Nkem studied him for a moment. "And what have you learned so far?" Kunle hesitated, then spoke honestly. "I've learned that wealth isn't just about money, it's about responsibility, trust, and staying true to yourself. But I'm still figuring out what it all means. Auntie Nkem smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. Good. Because the next step in your journey will require more than just effort. It will require you to understand who you are and what you stand for. Kunle felt a chill run down his spine. This task was far from over. Kunle left Auntie Nkem's home with a growing sense of unease. Her cryptic words echoed in his mind. Understand who you are and what you stand for. What could Madam Abeni have written to provoke such a response? His curiosity burned, but he knew better than to open the letter himself. As he walked back to Madam Abeni's mansion, Kunle couldn't help but notice how different the neighboring village was. The people seemed content, their lives simpler, their focus less on wealth and more on community. For the first time, Kunle questioned if the life he sought was truly what he needed. When he returned, Madam Abeni was waiting for him in her garden, her usual air of composure intact. Kunle handed her the letter without a word. She opened it, scanned its contents, and gave a faint nod, as if confirming something to herself. "Did Auntie Nkem say anything to you?" Madam Abeni asked, her tone unusually soft. "She asked me what I've learned," Kunle replied honestly. "And she told me the next step in my journey would require understanding who I am." Madam Abeni smiled faintly, her gaze drifting to the flowers around them. Auntie Nkem has always had a way of cutting to the heart of things. But she's right. You've come far, Kunle, but the hardest part is yet to come. Kunle tensed. "What do you mean, madam?" She turned to face him, her expression serious. "There's something you need to know about me, something I haven't told you. Everything I've put you through has been to prepare you, not just for life, but for a decision that will change both of our futures." Kunle's brow furrowed. "A decision? What kind of decision?" Madam Abeni hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Years ago, I made a pact with someone I trusted, a promise to pass on everything I've built to someone who proves themselves worthy. Someone who shows not just loyalty but also the strength to make difficult choices. That person, Kunle, could be you." Kunle's breath caught. Was she talking about handing over her wealth and estate to him? The possibility felt overwhelming, almost unreal. "But why me?" Kunle asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "Because you remind me of myself," Madam Abeni said simply. "You have the ambition, the fire, and the potential to lead. But before I can entrust you with everything, I need to be certain you won't repeat my mistakes." Kunle's heart raced. This wasn't just about money or power, this was about becoming someone worthy of a legacy. "What do I need to do?" he asked. Madam Abeni's eyes softened. "There's one final task. Tomorrow, you will meet with Chief Okoya again. But this time, it won't be about accusations or contracts. You'll need to negotiate a partnership with him, on my behalf and under my terms." Kunle's stomach churned. Chief Okoya was a powerful man, one who had already shown his willingness to play dirty. Could he really stand up to him? "And what if he refuses?" Kunle asked. "Then you'll need to decide how far you're willing to go to secure the deal," Madam Abeni replied, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "This isn't just a test of your skill, it's a test of your integrity. How you handle this will determine everything." Kunle nodded, though his mind was spinning. He left the garden with a heavy heart, knowing the next day would be a turning point. Kunle arrived at Chief Okoya's estate, the envelope with Madam Abeni's terms clutched tightly in his hand. The estate was as grand as he remembered, but this time, Kunle felt a stronger resolve. He wasn't the same person who had walked through those gates weeks ago. Chief Okoya greeted him with a sly smile, his imposing frame casting a long shadow in the morning light. Kunle, back so soon? What does Madam Abeni want this time? Kunle met his gaze without flinching. She has a proposition for you. A partnership that could benefit both of you. But it's on her terms. Chief Okoya's smile faded, replaced by a look of suspicion. Her terms, you say? And what makes her think I'd agree to that? Kunle handed him the envelope, watching as Chief Okoya opened it and read. His expression darkened, and Kunle braced himself for the backlash. This is bold, Chief Okoya said finally, his voice low and dangerous. She wants me to concede my control over the joint ventures? To let her call the shots? It's a fair deal, Kunle said, his voice steady. You'd still profit, and it would ensure stability for both of you. Chief Okoya chuckled, a sound that sent chills down Kunle's spine. You've got guts, boy, but guts won't protect you when you're dealing with people like me. Kunle squared his shoulders. Maybe not. But I'm not here to protect myself. I'm here to represent Madam Abeni. And she's offering you a chance to move forward peacefully. Chief Okoye studied him for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. You've got fire, I'll give you that. But fire can burn you if you're not careful. Kunle didn't respond, waiting as Chief Okoye mulled over the terms. Finally, the older man smirked. Tell Madam Abeni I'll consider it. But don't think this is over. Kunle exhaled, his heart pounding as he left the estate. The encounter had been tense, but he felt a sense of accomplishment. He had stood his ground and stayed true to his principles. When he returned to Madam Abeni, she was waiting for him in the grand hall. Her eyes searched his face as he relayed what had happened. You've done well, Kunle, she said softly. But this isn't the end. There's still more to learn, and more to decide. Kunle nodded, his resolve strengthening. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready to face it. Kunle awoke the next morning with a newfound sense of determination. The encounter with Chief Okoya had tested his resolve, but he felt stronger, more focused. Madam Abeni's cryptic words about a legacy still lingered in his mind. What did she mean by preparing him to carry on her work? When he arrived at the mansion, Mama Ekaete greeted him with an approving nod. You've been through a lot, young man, she said softly. But you're not done yet. Madam is waiting for you in the library. Kunle felt a sense of unease as he walked toward the grand library. The room was one of the most opulent in the mansion, lined with shelves of ancient books and illuminated by the soft glow of a chandelier. Madam Abeni stood at the far end, holding a leather-bound journal. You handled Chief Okoye well, she said without turning around. But there's more you need to understand about the path you're on. Kunle approached cautiously. I'm listening, madam. Madam Abeni's eyes softened. There's one final task. Tomorrow, you will meet with Chief Okoye again. But this time, it won't be about accusations or contracts. You'll need to negotiate a partnership with him, on my behalf and under my terms. She turned to face him, her expression serious. This journal contains the details of every decision I've made to build what you see here. The victories, the mistakes, and the sacrifices. If you're going to take on this legacy, you need to understand the weight of it. Kunle hesitated as she handed him the journal. Its leather cover was worn, and the pages inside seemed to hum with the energy of untold secrets. You want me to read this? Not just read it, she said firmly. Learn from it. The choices I made didn't just affect me, They shape the lives of everyone around me. If you're going to step into my shoes, you need to be prepared for the burden that comes with power. Kunle nodded, feeling the gravity of her words. He left the library with the journal in hand, his mind buzzing with questions. What kind of sacrifices had Madam Abeni made? And could he avoid making the same mistakes? That evening, Kunle sat in his modest room, the journal open on his lap. The pages were filled with Madam Abeni's meticulous handwriting, detailing her journey from a poor village girl to a powerful businesswoman. Her words painted a picture of determination and resilience, but also of loss and regret. One entry caught his attention. To gain power, I had to let go of love. To secure wealth, I had to make choices that haunted me. But the hardest part was losing trust, first in others and eventually in myself. Kunle's heart sank. Madam Abeni's life was far from the glamorous image she projected. Her wealth had come at a cost he wasn't sure he was willing to pay. The following morning, Madam Abeni called Kunle to her office. Her demeanor was calm, but her eyes held a glint of anticipation. Today, I'm sending you to oversee a deal with one of our most important partners, she said. This deal is critical, not just for the business, but for the people it will impact. If it falls apart, the consequences will ripple far and wide. Kunle straightened his posture. What do I need to do? You need to ensure the deal goes through on fair terms, she replied. But the partner, Mr. Adewale, is known for being difficult. He'll try to intimidate you. He'll try to push you into agreeing to terms that benefit him more than us. Kunle nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. This was his biggest challenge yet. The meeting was held in a sleek modern office building in the city. Mr. Adewale, a sharp-dressed man in his late 40s, greeted Kunle with a cold smile. His confidence was palpable, and his handshake was firm enough to feel like a warning. Let's get straight to business, Adewale said, sliding a contract across the table. These are my terms. Kunle read through the document carefully. As expected, the terms heavily favored Mr. Adewale. He took a deep breath and looked up, meeting the man's piercing gaze. These terms aren't fair, Kunle said evenly. They leave too much risk on our side. Adewale leaned back in his chair, smirking. Fairness is subjective, young man. In business you take what you can get. Perhaps, Kunle replied, his voice steady. But fairness builds trust, and trust builds partnerships that last. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Adewale leaned forward, his expression hardening. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts won't get you far if you can't deliver. Kunle didn't back down. Neither will greed. Adewale's eyes narrowed, but after a long pause, he broke into a grudging smile. Fine, let's renegotiate. When Kunle returned to Madam Abeni's mansion, he was exhausted but proud. The deal had been finalized, and the terms were fair for both parties. Madam Abeni listened intently as Kunle recounted the meeting, her expression unreadable as always. You've done well, she said finally. But there's one more thing you need to understand. Kunle waited, his heart pounding. This journey isn't just about wealth or power, she said. It's about legacy. And legacy isn't built in a day. It's built through the choices you make every single day. Kunle nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready to face it. Kunle couldn't shake the feeling that something was still being kept from him. Madam Abeni's journal had revealed parts of her story, but it left him with more questions than answers. What was the true cost of her legacy? And why had she chosen him to carry it forward? That morning, Madame Abeni called him to the library. When he arrived, she was seated at the grand desk, a faded photograph in her hands. Her usually composed demeanor seemed softer, almost vulnerable. "Kunle," she began, her voice quieter than usual. "There's something you need to know about why I've been preparing you." She handed him the photograph. It was old and grainy, showing a much younger Madame Abeni standing beside a man Kunle didn't recognize. The man had a strong, confident presence, with an unmistakable resemblance to Kunle. "Who is this?" Kunle asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Madame Abeni's eyes glistened. "That man was your father." Kunle froze. "My father? But how?"